You're listening to the Fertility Docs Uncensored podcast, featuring insight on all things fertility from some of the top-rated doctors around America. Whether you're struggling to conceive or just planning for your future family, we're here to guide you every step of the way.
Curious about your fertility? Levy Health makes it easy to understand. Get a comprehensive medical fertility analysis, including lab tests, all from the comfort of your home. Receive personalized insights on your fertility hormones reviewed by board-certified physicians. Here's how it works. Create an account, complete your health assessment, and get a customized lab form. Visit a nearby LabCorp or Quest for testing, and once your results are ready, book a free 20-minute consultation with a fertility coach for expert guidance. Visit www.levy.health/FDU and use code FDU10 at checkout for 10% off. Levy Health, decoding your fertility.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fertility Docs Uncensored. I am Dr. Carrie Bedient from the Fertility Center of Las Vegas, joined by my two sexy, stupendous, sensationally stellar co-hosts, Dr. Abby Eblen from Nashville Fertility Center.
Hi, everybody.
And Dr. Susan Hudson from Texas Fertility Center.
Hello, everyone.
And this morning, because we are recording, I guess, across all three time zones, we are still legitimately in the morning for all three of us. We are recording with Ali Prato, who is the co-founder of Fertility Rally and the founder of the Infertile AF podcast. And so we are so excited to have you with us this morning, Ali.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am such a fan of all three of yours, and I love what you guys have been doing. And this is so cool to do this crossover episode. Thanks for having me.
So excited.
So, Ali, how did you get into all of this?
Good question. So I'll give you kind of the Cliff's Notes, I guess. I am a journalist, so I worked in magazines for many, many years, and I've always loved interviewing people and telling people stories. I was working in a job where I wasn't feeling fulfilled a handful of years ago, and I was at the same time going through my own infertility journey, secondary infertility. So just to give people a little background in case they don't know, I had my first daughter without assisted reproductive technology, and then my son after many, many miscarriages and a whole bunch of drama and all the things. I finally had him through IVF. So they're 6 years apart. She's 15 and he is 9 now. So I was going through IVF. It's been like 10 years now, but I realized when I was going through it that I was so on an island. Like I felt so alone. And as a writer and someone that's always told other people's stories, I was constantly like, where are the people that are going through this? How come no one's talking about this?
Yeah.
You guys can probably attest a lot has changed in the last 10 years. Yes, thankfully, and it's not as taboo of a topic anymore, but we're still scratching the surface on infertility in general. And, there's still people in the shadows that don't want to talk about it. My whole thing was, where are these stories? I had my 4th miscarriage, and I remember going to the bookstore looking for books about miscarriage or women that I could relate to, because that's how I get through stuff, is just by relating to other people and sharing and trying to be like, is this crazy? Am I? All those. And I couldn't find any books on miscarriage. I mean, the section of the bookshelf was 3 inches wide, and there was a couple of random books. And I was like, why is no one talking about this? So long story short, I decided to start a podcast, and that podcast is Infertile AF. So I launched that in 2019. It was after I'd had my son, because it took me a couple of years to get through the trauma of everything I'd been through, to be able to talk about it again. But then I was like, you know what? I need to get these stories out there. So I started with my own story in episode 1 in March of 2019. And last week, the 311th episode came out. So it's been
awesome.
So many different stories. They're all under the umbrella of ART. So it's not just infertility stories, but it's family building, same-sex couples, trans people. I try to be very inclusive. I want to tell all different stories about people building their families in all these beautiful ways.
It's exciting. You started your podcast just about a year before we started ours.
Okay. Yeah. And at the time there were some podcasts, but not that many.
Yeah.
Have kind of come and gone over the years, but it's just been such a cool experience to not only meet so many interesting people like yourselves that are doing really amazing things and spreading awareness and education, but just the stories, my God, there's so many,
There's so many
amazing stories. And it's
So, Ali, how do you find the people that you talk to?
So it's kind of a mix. At the beginning, I was going after people because, I wasn't anything yet. Nobody had heard of my show. So I was asking friends, I put the word out. Does anybody know anybody who's gone through, IVF or had an infertility story? And so it was word of mouth at first. And now it's kind of a mix. I'll go after names in our industry or like celebrities, but a lot of people will come to me as well. I like to do a big mix of just people like in Fertility Rally, for example, telling their stories. And then one of my recent episodes was this woman named Kelly Girardi, who's an astronaut. I don't know if you guys know her, but she's like big on TikTok and she's been sharing her whole fertility story. So she was on my show. So it's kind of a mix of celebrities and not, and just people going through all different things. Like, as I said, I want everybody to be able to find an episode at least that they can be like, okay, that's me. I see myself in that. I can relate to that one.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, we started our podcast in February of 2020. And all three of us were physicians that were affiliated with Ovation Fertility, which is now part of Best Fertility. And we were at a dinner and we were like, you know what? We should start a podcast. There needs to be more people out there spreading good, solid information about the reality of infertility and what's actually out there. What does our alphabet soup mean?
And what's truthful and what's not? Because in my experience, I'm old enough that I did fellowship, and at that time there wasn't an internet. And I can remember one day when somebody brought me a stack of papers this big to tell me why they needed to be on something, and it was pretty inaccurate information. And back then, people didn't realize early on that the internet wasn't always truthful. And so we get so much of like, well, why didn't you do this procedure? Why didn't you do this test? And many of those tests have fallen by the wayside, like postcoital tests, anti-sperm antibodies. And so people you can't siphon or figure out what's true and what's not when you look at the internet. So that's really one of the motivations for me to be part of this.
Yeah. Did you guys always have chemistry right off the bat?
Well, we just met and we didn't know each other.
Right. You do. And it's such a good mix of personality.
We got really lucky. Yeah, we hit it really lucky. We all like each other really well.
We did. I mean, it was one of those things where our producer was a little worried because of having so many voices, but fortunately, all three of us have very unique voices and accents and intonations that you can always tell who's talking. And we literally developed a friendship over Zoom.
Yeah,
we did.
Yeah. And I'm sure you guys over the years have met, again, so many incredible people as well.
Oh, yeah.
Do you guys have any like favorite episodes or things that you've talked about that like out in your mind?
Yeah. Go ahead, Susan.
I love it every time we have guests because we present things from the physician perspective, but a lot of times when we have guests, we're able to bring in an outside perspective, whether it's from acupuncture or people in the nutrition industry or in the supplement industry or people who help provide medications or people who are telling their own stories, because there's so many dimensions to infertility. The medical part is important. And, that's really the main service we provide is really trying to provide good, solid information that you can take and be like, okay, let's apply this to our personal situation and go forward. But really tying in, because infertility really affects your entire walk of life as you're going through it.
Right.
And it honestly affects how you approach life from there on after as well.
100%. I would definitely say I'm so much of a changed person after going through my infertility journey. And I'm sure you guys that have been through it can say the same. It does change you to your core.
What were the best and worst memories of your fertility journey?
Oh my gosh, they're all bad. The best part is that
the good ones. Come up with the good ones.
Yeah. The best part is that, IVF did work and we had fun and I still look at him every single night before he goes to bed. And, he's 9 years old, as I said now. So at a certain point, he's going to be like, okay, Mom, stop. But I tell him every single day, I still can't believe you're here. And I can't. It's just such a miracle that it worked, because the gist of my story was that we did one round of IVF and I had 5 PGT tested embryos and only one of them came back normal.
Yeah.
It was like a Hail Mary, one shot. I didn't even realize at the time how rare that was, that was going to work. I was still in the camp where I thought IVF was a guarantee. Because again, like I didn't really know anybody yet. I hadn't started fertility. I hadn't started the podcast yet. So I didn't know all these stories of people going after round or having to pivot because it wasn't working for them. So we got really, really lucky. And I knew we were lucky at the time, but I didn't realize how lucky we were. So that's probably the best part of the story. I mean, that's definitely the best part. The worst parts were my husband and I almost split up. We really vocal about how hard this was in our marriage and our relationship. It got to a certain point where he always wanted to have another kid after we had our daughter, but it got to a point where he was like, I think we're good. Like he didn't want to be going through it anymore because he was seeing me. It was years and years, losses and depression and just stuff. And at a certain point, I think he was just worried about my mental health because he was like, do we need to keep doing this? And I was like, we're not done yet. Like, I'm not done. And I remember saying to him, I wish I could tell you I didn't want this so badly because I know I'm fucking up our marriage right now. Sorry. And I was like, but I can't tell you I don't want. I was listening to my heart and my gut, and it was the hardest thing that we've ever been through. But I was just like, we're not done. I want to do this again. I want to be a mom again. So that was really, really hard. We went to counseling and I went through a lot of therapy. But there was a point where we were like, are we going to make it? And he was like, I don't know. We really didn't know. It was really, really rough.
Ali, I think what you went through, in my personal opinion, I didn't go through a bunch of miscarriages. I was one of the luckier ones. But I think going through multiple miscarriages, I think that is one of the hardest roller coasters for somebody that gets to IVF, because it's just, you have so many ups and downs. And, you know, you just see people after 2 or 3 miscarriages, and a lot of them are just wrecked. I mean, it's hard to keep going through that. So I think that speaks to the resilience of you and your husband to be able to go through all that, still go through IVF and go through all those steps. It's hard to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you guys made it through to the end.
I know.
Nice, sweet boy.
We've been together since we were 16, which is crazy.
Wow.
We went to high school together, but we always give a disclaimer that we went to 2 different colleges and we like dated other people. So it's not nerdy. But yeah, I mean, honestly, though, that was another thing where I felt like people just weren't talking about the relationship piece of this and how, if you are in a partnership, how hard it can be, especially if 2 people aren't on the same page. And some of it was financial because we didn't have insurance coverage. So it was like, how much are we willing to pay? And I was like, I will pay $14 million trillion. I don't care. I'll pay anything. And he was being more reasonable about it, which at the time I was like, how could you put a price on a human life? And I was just,
I mean, there's so many different layers of like,
And
it's rare. You know, I think it's pretty rare that you see a couple on the exact same page. So for all the people that are listening, if you and your husband are not on the exact same page, to me, that's more the norm than everybody agreeing with everything, because there's so many different layers. And men, I think, do tend to think more, as a general rule, than women about the financial piece of it. But, because you're just going through all these hormones and emotions and all that. So it's hard to really kind of be on the same page on all those different layers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one thing that really contributes to it, whether you have recurrent pregnancy loss where it's more logical in thinking about it this way, but even in people who have other types of infertility, is you are constantly going through a grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
And you recurrently, whether it's miscarriages or having a period because you didn't get pregnant, in that you keep on having insults to your grieving process. And then you have 2 people. We all know there's a normal set of actions you go through your grieving process, but people jump around. And when you have 2 people jumping around and you're both trying to support each other, but also take care of your own mental and physical health, it's so challenging. And that's the reason we've talked multiple times about getting outside help, getting counseling, talking, being parts of communities, because it is isolating. When I did my IVF, even as a fertility doctor, I mean, everybody in my office knew, but my family didn't know. And with a lot of my family, they didn't know for a long time that we actually did IVF. And so even somebody within the system, I totally understand that isolation. I was traveling back and forth across the country to do my IVF for various reasons. And, I think a lot of those experiences have led me to be the type of physician I am, and really make sure there were certain things that I never want to happen in my personal clinic, where where I did my IVF, it definitely was kind of a cattle call type of situation where everybody showed up at 6 o'clock in the morning and you sat there and waited for 2.5 hours until your name randomly got called, and that was just for your blood work. And then you waited more for your ultrasound, and that uncertainty. And I think one of the most striking memories was I have a very, very accurate auditory memory. And so I would have conversations with somebody at the clinic, and then a couple days later, the story would change or the plan would change. And I'm like, this is not what I was told. And they're like, yes, it was. But I'm like, okay, we're not going to sit here and argue. But
so
I was
with the medical team you were having,
with the medical team. And it's that whole thing of being told one thing and then things changing and it not being the same story. That's something that I have no tolerance with my staff. I'm like, we always are consistent. We tell the same thing. You have a reason behind what you say. So, if you don't know an answer, ask somebody who knows the answer. Don't just make something up, because I mean, I would get off the phone and be in tears, and I know what's going on.
That's so interesting. And I think it's so interesting too. I've interviewed a lot of doctors on my show, and they always say, like, I remember Ruhi Jalani, who you guys probably know in our industry. She was like, I made the worst patient as a doctor. Did you feel that way too?
No, because I had to work with everybody. So, and I was in a small office. But I will say that from my perspective, what I felt with two things. One is I never thought the egg retrieval would be as uncomfortable post-op as it was. So I'm probably the first one in my office. If somebody wants pain medicines, if they ask specifically, I'll give it to them. And the other thing was, with all the poking and prodding that you do, you have all these different injections you give. And as a physician, we're like, oh yeah, let's just add another 75 of HMG. Well, in some clinics, that's a whole different shot. Or let's just add this, this, and this. And you get so many shots that you give yourself. Then you get prodded with the vaginal probe. Then you get stuck for blood draws. And it kind of makes you on the edge after a while, because day after day, 12 days of that when you're not used to doing anything like that, it's a big deal. I mean, it's hard not to be cranky when you get poked and prodded every day for 2 weeks.
And I remember getting all the meds. Well, first of all, my meds got lost. And because I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and it was $4,000 out of pocket of all the meds. And I was start them the next morning, and the package never arrived. But I got an email that was like, your package has been delivered. And I was like, oh my God, it's not here.
My neighbors.
And we were literally going up and down door to door on our street, different apartment buildings and houses, and being like, did you get a package? We couldn't find it. I was like hyperventilating in a paper bag, like, all this money lost. You're not going to be able to start tomorrow. I was panicked. And then literally at like 11th hour, some random neighbor rang our bell and was like, I remember I gave him the biggest hug, and he's like, whoa, who are you? I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. But I'd called the pharmacy, and they're like, yeah, they were delivered. And I was like, well, they're not here. So what do you want me to do?
Yeah. Oh, that's stressful.
Yeah. But in terms of the injections too, I wanted to say that it was so, as a non-physician, getting these meds and having to mix them, and then the stakes are so high. What if I screw this up? That's so nerve-wracking too. And again, another thing that I didn't know about, because nobody was talking about that.
How do you think things have changed since you started going through your fertility journey, which you said was pretty isolating?
Yeah.
And then the midpoint when you started the podcast, and then Fertility Rally, and today, like, how have you seen this world evolve?
Well, I think just the transparency is the major thing, is that people are finally coming out and sharing their stories. And I think it's because women are such badasses. And when we bat stuff like this, it's like, it's okay to tell your story, and it's not cute, and it's not pretty, and it's, you might feel abnormal, but I think that people stepping up, and I'm not saying that everyone has to share their story. If people aren't comfortable with that, that's totally cool too. But I think that just the giving each other a forum, and as women, we've been lifting each other up, and that's so cool. You're okay. I went through that too. We're normalizing the conversation, and we're not there yet. It's still really, like I said at the top, it's still really taboo in a lot of places, or certain people just don't want to talk about this still. But I do think that that's the biggest change, is that just the amount of people that are people who have like a big platform, or people who are in the news and sharing their stories, that does a big difference.
This podcast is sponsored by Receptiva Diagnostics. Receptiva Diagnostics is a powerful test that can help detect inflammatory conditions on the uterine lining that might be preventing you from becoming pregnant or staying pregnant. If you have experienced implantation failure or recurrent pregnancy loss, ask your doctor about Receptiva Diagnostics testing. If found, uterine inflammation can be treated, providing a new pathway to achieving a successful pregnancy. Receptiva Diagnostics, because the journey is worth it.
What do you think as you were going through miscarriages? And so some of this is me being prompted by a couple of days ago, I was seeing a patient who is extraordinarily high achieving. She is smart, she is talented, she is beautiful, she is all of the adjectives. And she just had her first miscarriage and she feels like a complete and utter failure. And I can see it written all over her face. It's in her body language. It's how she and her partner interact. And I'm trying to gently nudge her to, hey, you don't have to do this by yourself. I make a lot of my patients say, especially if they've had miscarriages, repeat after me. This is not my fault. And to a woman, always tears, because they think it's their fault. And it's not. It's really not. And so what things got you through as you were going through these miscarriages that we can tell our patients? Because I want nothing more than for them to have all of the backup and all of the support. And my staff is great. I'm very fortunate with who I work with, but they're not in my office all the time. Mm-hmm. And even when they are, I'm sure that's traumatic for them too. I have absolutely no doubt about that, no matter how good our intentions are. What else should I be offering my patients to help them through this?
First of all, you have such a soothing voice. To have you, Carrie, be like, it's not your fault. Yeah, I just got the chills when you said that. Because I'm like, I wish.
She's got the velvet voice. Just don't make her mad. You never believe the words sometimes that come out of that velvet mouth.
The thing is, I don't feel like I had that really when I was going through it. I didn't have anybody saying that to me. I didn't have a group of women that I could Zoom with on a weekly basis and talk about what we were going through. And that's why I ended up creating this stuff, is because it's the stuff I wish I had when I was going through it. So I remember I can't remember if it was my second or third miscarriage, but calling the doctor and being like, I'm bleeding, I'm pregnant. And I remember them talk about an audio memory, Susan. I remember them being like, oh, you're probably having a miscarriage. And I was like, okay. It was just such a flippant. And I was like, come in, and they're like, no, this happens all the time. I felt so blown off and so not. And it was another female on this medical staff. I don't remember maybe whatever, it doesn't matter. But I remember being like, well, shit, that doesn't make me feel any better. And point being, I really didn't have a lot of resources to get through it myself. And, like I said, that's why I created the rally, and which is just a community of women all over the country and other parts of the world too, that, come together, and we call it the Worst Club with the Best Members, because it's just people that are going through all sorts of, but it's people who are wonderful and want to help each other. So I guess the short answer to your question is, I think it's so wonderful that you guys, are coming from a place of empathy, and you're able to, having been through whatever your circumstances were, and then applying that, I want to make it better for the people coming after me. That's how I think we can all make a difference, is I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but I'm glad that at least having gone through it, I'm able to pay it forward and be like, this is what you need, or this is what I wish I had.
So talking about additional resources, when we were talking a little bit before the show, it sounds like both of us, our entities, have some exciting publishing information coming out this year.
Yes, let's talk about yours first.
So Abby, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so we started out, in the vein of really wanting to get useful information out there. One of the gaps that we really felt like out there were for people that do IVF. Physicians, we sit down for about 30 minutes, and everything you ever going to learn about IVF is in that 30 minutes, from why you should do it, how we give the injections, how the medicines are ordered, IVF, PGT, PGTM, all the genetics. And at the end, and it's just gotten longer and longer and longer because there's more things that we have to tell people every year. And so at the end, you can just see it's like a deer in headlights. And I usually start out and go, listen, I know that you're going to be overwhelmed by the end, but I'm sorry. There's just one time I need to sit down and tell you about everything. And so we all thought it'd be a great idea if somebody essentially had a handbook written by people who do IVF, which we do every day, we do IVF, we do egg retrievals, we do embryo transfers. And so we feel like we know what people need to know. And you think a lot of people wish that after they talk to their doctor that they have something that they can refer back to and go, oh, now why am I taking that medicine? What's that for? And but what am I going to feel like after the IVF egg retrieval? And how does the egg retrieval work? And so basically it's from the very beginning, before IVF, what you need to think about. During the process, we go through the egg retrieval and kind of all the people you may meet, what their roles are. And then at the very end, we talk about the reasons why people may want to do IVF, like if they want to do it for genetic testing or recurrent pregnancy loss, or reasons that people wouldn't think you would want to do IVF. If you're able to get pregnant, why would you want to do IVF? A lot of the reasons. So
absolutely,
that's sort of the makeup of our book, and it will be coming out in September of 2025, and we're really excited about it.
That is something I wish that I had. I would have killed to have that. That's such a valuable resource. And I remember like all the acronyms. I was just like, I don't know what any of this stuff means. And it is so overwhelming. And it just adds to that layer of like shit that you have to deal with. It's like,
because you're like, okay, I think I've heard this one time. But what is PGTA again? I mean, because you usually, when you get started, you may meet with your doctor, but you don't truly get started for 2 or 3 months at least after that. And by that point, how many of us would remember this really detailed conversation? And so it's just a big gap in our medical field.
That's so awesome. Well, I can't wait to get my hands on that. That's really cool.
Our book is called The IVF Blueprint. And I think it's so exciting because it literally shows our listeners and our readers how we build the IVF process from the part of what are things you need to do for you before you get started? Health-wise, mental-wise, all those types of things. What are things you need to do to prepare? What's it like going through it? And really trying to give an inside view of all those details. I mean, when we sit there and we look at our book and then we look at what we tried to explain in those 30 minutes that Abby was just talking about, it's like how we're just touching the surface. And it's really exciting to hopefully be able to provide this information so people can go back and look when they're having those moments of, no, I don't remember, but I know there was something about this.
100%. And do you guys find that as you've been writing it, you have to keep updating it because things are changing? And
or somebody will ask us a question in the office and be like, oh, we need to get that in the book.
Right. Absolutely. That's so awesome. I can't wait to see it. Congrats.
And tell us about your upcoming book.
Yes. I was going to say, Ali, your first book is sitting on my shelf in my office.
Oh, me too. And I will tell you, when people walk in my room, my office, I have it sitting so they can see it. And they're like, oh, wow, what is this? This is so cool. It's a great book.
The full body chills, because I was going to say, I'm going to send you all each a copy, but
we have one.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. That's awesome. That's really awesome. So yeah, I wrote a children's book last year called Work of Art. So play on the word assistive technology. And it's basically me telling the story to my son of how he was born. He overhears me on the playground saying he was an IVF baby. And then this is something that actually happened in the car on the way home. He's like, what's IVF? And then I was like, oh, do you want me to explain it to you? So it's a children's book. And, talking about normalizing the conversation, again, it was something that, I was like, I wish I would have had this when I was going through it, because it's a good way to introduce to kids and families, and even kids who aren't IVF babies, that this is a way that families are being created. And it's beautiful. And it's amazing that this technology, this medicine, this science, all the things exist. I never wanted my son to feel weird about the way that he was born, because it's different than how his sister came into this world. He thinks it's cool, or maybe he doesn't, but he thinks it's cool in a book. He's like, am I famous? Like a little book tour. And I was doing all these story times at bookstores in Jersey and New York. And one of them, I was like, do you want to read the book? So he read the book to the crowd. That's cute. That's so cute. Yeah. But anyway, the whole plan was to have Work of Art be a series. So my story was being told first. And then, as you guys know, there's so many other different ways to, tell these stories. So the next book has been written, and it's a totally different family building story. It involves an IUI, single mom who having a sperm donor. And it's actually my best friend's story and my godson. And so it's all the things again, but a totally different Work of Art story. So that's book number 2, and it's being illustrated right now. I actually just got the first batch of illustration by my illustrator. So that will come out this spring, hopefully. And then I've already got book number 3 in my head, which will be an egg donor story. So
I was going to say, that's a great idea because there's lots of different stories you can tell.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. But the hopes is that these books normalize it. And, one of my favorite things that's happened so far is that the first work of art book is in my son's school library, and the librarian emailed me and was like, I just want you to know it keeps getting checked out by all these kids. Oh, because it's like, you guys have the book. Thank you. So the cover, it's fun and it's cute and there's well, and I think kids might see it and not really know what it's about, but I love the notion that they might take it home, read it with their parents, and then they're like, oh, I didn't know that was even a thing. Oh, cool. Sunny was made in a lab. I think it's so good for kids to be exposed to all these things so there's no stigma.
Well, I'll tell you, as an adult son who's soon to be 23, who was my first IVF baby, he's always been very proud of the fact that he's an IVF baby. And in fact, the girl he's dating right now, somewhere in the conversation, she goes, yeah, Benjamin told me he's an IVF baby. I'm like, really?
That's
talked about that.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to a question for you guys. How did you tell your kids who were born through IVF, for those of you that did that?
I think it just came out organically. I think based on what I do, it wasn't that big of a deal for my kids at all because it's part of what I do. I don't really remember having a specific conversation, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so much of the nature of our dinner conversation.
It's just,
I say more at dinner than anybody ever wants to hear about, so they usually just don't ask me questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's good. If it's just in the ether, if it's just part of the conversation, that means it's becoming more and more normalized. So it's awesome.
In other people's households, you're not talking about IVF on a regular basis on, just a random day. So what's normal in our houses is those types of things and family building. I mean, I have to say, I think my kids, the hardest thing for them is I live in a smaller city than most fertility doctors. And so most fertility doctors live in cities that have over 1 million population, that type of thing. That's not the case for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're pretty familiar with us being in the grocery store or out to dinner, and somebody comes up and they're like, oh, Dr. Hudson, you helped create my baby, and that type of thing. And so they're always very prepared for that. But as my kids are now teenagers, as they have gotten older, they have more interactions where they're on their own, and they aren't prepared when they're on their own. They're like, it's like, my mom's not here.
Right.
My mom's not here. It was, what is the movie where the girl is like, I'm prepared in my, Pretty Woman. The whole thing when she's like, when Stucky comes and is like proposing her as a prostitute, and it's like, I can do it when I'm in my own clothes and in my normal situation. I think of it like that. If my mom's there, I expect somebody to come and talk to me about fertility issues, and it's fine, but it's weird when I'm on my own and not in that protective environment.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I'll say on a side note, this is not quite on topic, but I thought back to one of the funniest times I had was when my daughter was probably about 11 or 12, and we were in Home Depot getting something. I don't know what it was. And this guy who I didn't initially recognize came up, hat, overalls, walked up and started asking me about his sperm count at Home Depot. And my daughter was mortified.
Cringy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You never know what you're going to encounter. So how did you tell your son about being an IVF baby?
Yeah. So it's basically like what happened in the book. He overheard me talking about it. And then I was like, let's talk about it before bed tonight. So he got on his jammies and I crawled in bed with him. And I just said, we tried to have a baby. We loved your sister so much that we wanted another baby so badly. And that's another thing I want to say, that with secondary infertility, I feel like sometimes it gets a little misunderstood. And I remember when I was going through it feeling like, oh my God, do people think I'm being greedy? I already have a kid. And even some people being like, can't you just be happy with what you have? Why are you putting yourself through this? And I remember saying, and this is important for me to include in the book or try to convey at least, was like, I love being a mom so much, more than I ever thought that I would, that it's coming from a place of love. I want to do it again. And that's the best way that I can think to explain it. So that makes much sense. But that's what I basically said to Sonny, was his sister is the best thing that ever happened to us. And I'm welling up because it's so emotional. She's the best thing that ever happened to us. And I just wanted to have another baby. I wanted to do it all again. And so I wanted you so badly. And I tried to have other babies and they weren't healthy, so they were never born. And then we went to a doctor and you were made in the lab, and he was like a superhero. That's basically how I told him. But you guys said it's just always been, they hear me doing my podcast, they hear me on the rally.
Yeah.
This has just always been in the vernacular, and fertility stuff has always been in their world. So it wasn't a big, dramatic thing where it's like, I need to tell you something.
Do you think that and this is part a silly question, but part I'm really kind of curious. So your 16-year-old daughter, because every child knows that their parents only had sex once. Twice if you've got a sibling, 3 times if you've got 2. But truly, your parents only ever had sex once.
Right.
So has your daughter, who was not born through IVF, has she ever had a cringe factor of like, oh crap, mom and dad actually did have sex, but Sonny didn't, and so he doesn't have to think about that? I'm kind of curious, is there that visceral kid reaction of like, ew?
Yeah. I mean, I think at this point she's a teenage girl, and I think everything I do is cringy. So yeah. I think the fact that I even have this podcast is probably embarrassing for her, talking about sex. And if she ever listened to the first episode, I mean, I talk about having sex and being like, just stick it in, fighting with my husband during intercourse.
Maybe she shouldn't listen to the podcast.
They should. They will die. But again, it's like, we have to be honest about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not pretty, but I do think it's important. So Carrie, yes, I think she just thinks I'm cringy, top to bottom, no matter what.
I feel like I hit a new parenting level high when I made my daughter cringe, when it was just the 2 of us in a room alone in our own house. There was no one else around, and she still cringed at me. So I feel like it's...
How old is your daughter?
What was that?
How old is she?
She is 11 right now.
Yes. Okay. Begins. That's when it begins. When they can look at you and cut you down to size with like a sideways glance.
Yeah.
I've never felt so insecure as when my daughter will be shopping and I'm like, ooh, that's cute. And she'll go, for you or for me? And I'm like,
yeah. I would never wear that, Mom.
Yeah.
Those are mom jeans.
And to think, we are trying to promote this particular experience for all of our patients. Like, hey, let's help you feel insecure. Let's help you feel like you're irrelevant. Let's help you feel like you are the tiniest speck of dust.
Absolutely. Yes. No, I know there's so many instances, and irrelevant is such a good word because she uses that word too. And it's like, God, I swear I used to be cool. I used to work at Playboy. I was cool. And they're like,
wow. Yeah. Well, Ali, we would have started out with that.
Like, we could have led with that.
Who works at Playboy? I've never met anybody who worked at Playboy.
First job out of college, I worked at Playboy magazine. I was an editor there for 10 years. It was,
oh my gosh, the things you probably wrote and heard.
The stories, the mansion party. Yes. That's a whole new episode, you guys. We'll have to do a part 2.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. That's quite a job.
Well, we are so glad that we got the opportunity to talk with you and on air so we can introduce our audience to you, because our podcast is very much the technical of like, you went through this and this is what your doctor's saying and this is what you're thinking about and like all of the technical parts of it. And so it's really wonderful to have another resource to send our patients to for the you're not alone part.
Yes. Thank you. And back at you. I'm so glad that we did this, because I want people to, if they're not aware of you, I mean, the way that I learned about you all was through Fertility Rally people. They're like, you got to listen to this podcast. And,
oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
I think it's rising tide lifts all ships. Is that the goal? Yeah. Room for all of us in what we're doing. And I love to link up with other women in particular in this space and be like, you're doing something awesome. Let's help each other out and let's spread the word, because there's never enough resource.
Ali, speaking of that, I meant to ask you about Fertility Rally. For somebody that doesn't know about it, tell us about it real quick.
Okay. So yeah, this is something we started, a woman named Blair Nelson and I co-founded this, and it was during COVID, during the lockdown. We started having these Zoom calls. She and I had met. She was on my podcast, episode number 8, because she had emailed me and was like, I'm going through this. So she was on my show. We became friends. And then we started just being like, there's so many people in this Instagram community who are talking about what they're going through. And so we started hosting Zoom calls just randomly during COVID. And then they were getting really popular. And I think this is a thing.
Yeah.
Created Fertility Rally, which is a community. It's a lot of support groups. We have 4 to 5 virtual support groups per week Blair and I still host the Wednesday night call every single week. So we've been doing 2020. But we have the Sunday group. We have a Monday pregnancy after infertility group. We have a Tuesday motherhood after infertility group.
Wow.
Surrogacy support group. We've had over the years, we've had almost 5,000 members coming through the doors. We don't want people to stay because we do.
You want them to move on to happier things.
We're like, okay, that's good because you don't need us anymore. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
There's a lot of churn, like in terms of members, but we've had some founding members that are still with us that just made their best friends. And we did a fertility rally in Austin in last September. We did one in Chicago the year before that. And we've had like 35 people come from different parts of the country and all spend the weekend together. Fertility Rally Live, which you guys have been a part of, which is an all-day virtual event. So it's basically, again, all under the umbrella of stuff that I wish I had when I was going through it selfishly. So, the rally is there. And like I said, we have all these different support groups and we have a website full of videos and resources and things like that. We're on Instagram. So if anybody listening wants to check out the rally and like come to a group and see if they like it, they can reach out to me at any point. We're happy to have anybody going through anything. We have members going through all sorts of different journeys. So it's been awesome.
So awesome.
Wow, you made a lot of impact, I'm sure, with all of those different groups. That's amazing.
Most incredible people who are just,
That's
as you guys
great.
know, the bond is instant and these are friends for life.
You've been at war together.
So, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ali. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening. Subscribe to Apple Podcasts to have the next episode pop up automatically for you. Be sure to subscribe to YouTube. That really helps us spread reliable information and help as many people as possible.
Visit fertilitydocs.uncensored.com and infertileafgroup.com to learn more about all of us.
As always, this podcast is intended for entertainment. It's not a substitute for medical advice from your own physician. Subscribe, sign up for emails, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
This podcast is sponsored by Receptiva Diagnostics. Receptiva Diagnostics is a powerful test that can help detect inflammatory conditions on the uterine lining that might be preventing you from becoming pregnant or staying pregnant. If you have experienced implantation failure or recurrent pregnancy loss, ask your doctor about Receptiva Diagnostics testing. If found, uterine inflammation can be treated, providing a new pathway to achieving a successful pregnancy. Receptiva Diagnostics, because the journey is worth it.